As many of you know, I've had numerous health issues over the last 3, 4, 5 years, and today I was going to talk about my experiences in dealing with the Waikato hospital, which is in a town called Hamilton here in New Zealand, and also my experiences of dealing with my local GP. Now, before we start the video properly, I do have to say that this is my own experiences. I'm not dramatizing it and or exaggerating it or making any overall comment. This is just basically what has happened to me and my experiences in trying to stay alive, basically. I do fully appreciate the health service here in New Zealand, and indeed in many countries of the world, is under extreme pressure due to increasing amount of patients and lack of resources and general stuff like that. And New Zealand is no exception. And I have to say that by and large, you get a pretty good deal here in New Zealand. So please don't think this video is going to be a slaughter the health service video, because it's not. But it's basically just to tell you what I've experienced. Firstly, a little bit about myself, and this is quite short, so I hope you don't get bored. I'm 50... No, I'm not. First, an overview of my health generally. At present, I am 74 years old, and I have been a type 1 diabetic now for over 50 years. So that's a hammer in the coffin before you even start. Saying that, up until 5 years ago, I've been in generally fairly good health, in spite of being type 1 diabetic. Nearly 5 years ago, I had a triple bypass, which at this stage is largely irrelevant to this story, so we'll draw a line under that. And the story starts approximately 2 years ago, when I started to feel unwell again. My symptoms, largely at this early stage, were that of feeling tired, weak, lethargic, headache, and a general unwell feeling. It's very hard to define, but you know how it is when you wake up some mornings and you think, oh, not going to be a good day today. Well, that's what started to happen. And eventually it felt like my heart was pounding, whereas normally you can ignore your heart. It does its business and that's it. But there was just a feeling that things were not as good as they could be. Now, I have my own blood pressure monitor, which looks a bit like this. Now, this I bought some time ago, just after I came out of hospital from my triple bypass, basically to keep an eye on my blood pressure, because your blood pressure tells you a lot about what's going on. I mean, ideally, it should be somewhere in the region of about 120/70. And if it differs greatly from that, then you need to see a doctor. Obviously, it can go in both directions. It can go low, and if you start getting blood pressures much below about 100, then there's some issue, and it could be caused by medication. But equally, if it goes much above the 120, 125, you would be considered to have a high BP, and if it's around about the 150 or 160, that would be an issue that needs addressing. Now, I do have to tell you, if you haven't already guessed, I'm not medically trained under any stretch of the imagination. I've just learnt what I've learnt through my own experience and research by the various drug manufacturers, and to a lesser extent Dr. Google, because again, from my experience, there's more false information on the internet than accurate information. I started to notice whilst taking my BP readings that the meter would often come up with error, and it increasingly came up with error, and I actually went out and purchased a second meter because I thought it was faulty, to be honest. Something you should know about these BP meters: they're fine all the time your ECG or your heartbeat is nice and regular. This is what a good ECG should look like. As you can see, the pulses are evenly spaced and there's not a mess. It's even, you get the bip, 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 and the gap is the same between them. When things start to go wrong and your heart goes into tachycardia, it looks more like this. And as you can see there, instead of a nice even beat, you've just got a mush. And that's because your heart is beating, instead of at say 80 beats per minute or maybe less, it can be over 100 beats. And in my case, it was at worst, it was up to about 180 beats per minute. And when it's like that, you don't feel well. I can assure you don't feel well, because what's happening is you're getting a lot of small beats rather than a defined beep. And the consequences are, it's as if you've got very low, well, you have in fact got very low blood pressure. So you feel very lightheaded, you feel like you're going to faint, generally not well. And I ended up buying one of these little ECG monitors. Whilst this is not a professional piece of equipment, it does give you a very good idea what's going on with your heart, and it's something you can give to your doctor rather than just go to him and say, don't feel well. You can show him this, and it clearly shows that you have fibrillation or tachycardia, and that was basically what happened to me. I took the doctor, my GP, some graphs that I'd printed out, similar to what I've just shown you on here. Initially, he wasn't very impressed. Clearly, it's not a professional piece of equipment. But as I said to him, it clearly shows you that this is my ECG on a good day, nice pulse. This is my ECG on a not good day. Clearly, something's very majorly wrong. I started getting a lot of tachycardia quite often once or twice a week. And each time it seemed to be more, well, worse isn't the word, but more intense, and the side effects became more apparent, and they lasted for longer. So sometimes the tachycardia would only last for 10 minutes, then it came to an hour, and then several hours. And once or twice in fact, I called an ambulance and actually went to the hospital in Waikato, in Hamilton, and presented myself with some of the graphs that I'd printed out. Once again, the doctors weren't that impressed that I'd done this, and they could see there was something wrong, so I was admitted. The first time that I was admitted overnight, they also did a blood test which checks for enzymes in the blood, which would show if I'd had a heart attack or a stroke, and it's repeated again 2 hours later. So that's the only test I was given, but I was placed on, as I say, the ECG monitor overnight. Because at that stage most of my tachycardia was only an hour or two. After that it was fine for another 2 or 3 days. In the morning the doctor came round, looked at my ECG monitor and said, nothing wrong with you, go home. And that was my first really, I wouldn't say annoyance, but it was said to me in no uncertain terms that this is an emergency department and not a general hospital admission, and I should go back to my GP. Whereas I was expecting them to say, yes, there's something very wrong with your heart, as this ECG shows, so we will do something about that. But no, they didn't want to do anything about it except get rid of me. And that's exactly what they did. I was discharged and I went home with my tail between my legs, as if I was guilty of wasting their time. A few more weeks, maybe up to a month, went past, and a very similar thing happened again. I had a really bad attack, and there's no point in going to your GP at this stage, because all he will do is tell you to go to the hospital. So I bypassed the GP and went to the hospital again with virtually the same results. It got better, mainly because I'm laying on the bed or lying on the bed. We call it laying on the bed. And you're at rest, your heart's at rest, and so by the morning, nothing wrong with me. And again, very similar results. Go home, see your GP. We'll leap forward now about another 4, maybe 6 weeks. All of a sudden it starts up again, and I think to myself, no, I'm not going to go to the hospital yet again and be thrown out as nothing, well, I'm not saying nothing wrong with you, but this is an emergency department. What you've got isn't an emergency, even though you might think it is, as indeed I did, because when your heart goes like that, you really think that it's your time is up, I can assure you. And if you've had such a thing yourself, you'll know exactly what I'm saying. So I resisted. I just, well, laid on the bed and waited for it to go away, which it did after X number of hours. But the next day, much the same happened, and it kept happening. And then I thought, well, this is getting ridiculous. I'm tachycardic more than I'm not, so I have to take some action. Once again, for the 3rd time, I'm admitted, supposedly overnight, but overnight I was tachycardic most of the night. And in the morning, I was still tachycardic, and they decided to admit me for an unspecified length of time. And over the course of the next 2 to 3 days, I was in and out of tachycardia virtually all the time. And when you're in there for a long time, you're not connected to the big ECG monitor, you know, the one that looks like a laptop. You have a little portable one which fits into a pocket that you haven't got. So you walk about dragging this machine around, and you can actually see its display. Well, I found out you could, by pressing various buttons, you could see what it was doing. But it's connected and monitored through to whether it's the staff room or one of the rooms where the nurses in particular hang out. And every so often I could hear the alarms going off, and within less than a minute a nurse would come running in and say, "Oh, what's happened?" I say, "Well, just me, tachycardia again, boring." It was worse, of course, every time I moved. And you're not really encouraged to leave the bed when you're in hospital, as I'm sure you're aware, because they want to know where you are and what you're doing. But occasionally one has to visit the toilet, and virtually every time I got out of bed and walked to the toilet, someone would be banging on the toilet door. "Mike, are you in there? You okay?" I said, "Well, yeah, tachycardia." And anyway, it was then decided after the third day of the nurses keep running around wondering where I am, why I'm setting off the alarm, was I still alive? Because I was getting some horrific numbers. Eventually the cardiologist, or one of them, came round and said, "Yeah, we think you've got a problem. Well, you've got a problem, and we're going to sort it out." And initially, surprised, I thought they'd be sending me home and contact your GP. But no, I was pleasantly surprised, but surprised at the answer. Because they said to me, "We're going to fit you with a pacemaker." And I thought, right. But previously to going into hospital, in my research, I didn't think that was the answer. Because if you have tachycardia, it means, as I explained earlier, your heart is going 10 to the dozen. And you want something to slow it down, basically, and keep it in rhythm. But a pacemaker won't do that. A pacemaker can only add pulses to your heart. So imagine your heart's doing 100 pulses, just as a number. And it should be doing 120. Again, just a number. The pacemaker will add those 20 extra pulses so that everything's running as it should be. So I couldn't really see why I would be given a pacemaker. But I thought, well, I'm just the patient. I know nothing. He's the guy, the big cheese, the whatever other words you can think of, to an expert, shall we say. So I thought, oh, okay, whatever. Before we go any further, I should have mentioned earlier that one of the other issues I had was not only tachycardia, but bradycardia. Now, what's that, I hear you shout? Bradycardia, or bradycardia, depending on how you like to say it. Not that I'm saying it correctly necessarily. Apologies, it's spelt like this. What that is, it's basically the opposite. It's where your heart goes below 60 beats per minute. That's classed as bradycardia. I can see I'm going to have a problem with this word. Anyway, now I had both of these. Yes, I know I'm awkward, and it would have been easier. So the bradycardia could have been rectified by a pacemaker, because let's imagine my heart was only going at 50 beats per minute. That makes you feel equally unwell, not to the same extent as the tachy, but it means that for different reasons you don't get enough oxygen, so you become short of breath because your heart's not pumping blood around the lungs, basically, and even your brain. So you get similar symptoms but different. You feel very weak, literally like you're going to fall down, and if you just leap out of the chair or step out of the bed or off the bed quickly, you are in great danger of passing out. And many times I came close to that because you forget that you've got this problem. I know this sounds ridiculous, but when you're laying in the bed, you feel okay, largely, in inverted commas. But the moment, because you're used to just jumping out of bed, you do that and think, oh, and then the room starts going round and you think, oh, I'm going to pass out, which luckily I never have. I've always managed to rescue myself in time. I had both ends of the scale, bradycardia at times and tachy most of the time. I should have mentioned also at this stage that my low BP is caused largely by my medication. One of these that I was on is a beta blocker. Now, one of the side effects of many horrendous side effects, again we'll talk about this later, is that it slows your heart, and it also in the process lowers your blood pressure, which is fine if you've got high blood pressure, but even so it can also slow it down too much and you end up with bradycardia and other side effects. So here I am in the hospital bed. When the cardiologist comes round again, I said to him, excuse me, I don't know anything about this, but this is what I think. And I suggested that a pacemaker was not exactly what I needed. And I also said, because my bradycardia is caused, in my humble opinion, you're the expert, I know nothing, by my tablet, because I've never had low BP before I started on these tablets. He went away and came back. I've decided that a pacemaker is not what you need, and what you do need is an ablation. Again, I hope I've said this correctly. Spelling here. What this is a kind of operation on your heart, a procedure. They don't call it operation. And what it does, it stops one chamber of the heart sending superfluous pulses through to the other part of the heart. Now, I want to keep this really simple. If you want to explore this, just look it up. I mean, it goes into great details, but really all you need to know is it stops superfluous signals coming from one part of the heart into the part that actually does the beating. So if you can stop that, you're cured, potentially. It sends a signal up some wires, and it can do one of two things. It can either burn the link between the two chambers, effectively isolating it. It tends to be done like that in America. It's an RF heating system. But in New Zealand and many other parts of the world, they do the opposite. They freeze it. But it still basically does the same thing, because if you freeze tissue, you kind of burn it anyway, don't you? Because it's like frostbite. And that's what they did on mine, and that's what they suggested they should do. To my surprise, they agreed to do the procedure on the following Monday or Tuesday, depending on space available, which was only 2 or 3 days to wait. Well, in the meantime, I had a scan on my heart to see if they could see what was basically going on. And that procedure largely failed because my heart was fluctuating and fibrillating and tachycardia so much that they couldn't get an accurate scan of my heart, so they went in largely blind. There I am in the pre-op area, and of course they have to do the obligatory shave around the groin, which was great fun. Is this your name? Is this where you live? And the usual things. Any allergies? I said, well, the only allergy, it's not really an allergy, yes, I suppose it is, that could affect my operation, which you've already got this information from previous questionnaires, is that I am allergic to the high contrast dye that they use to squirt into your arteries so they can get a better picture of what's going on. Because I'm allergic to this, the effect can be very dangerous if you can go into anaphylactic shock, but that's an extreme case, and I said that so far that's not happened. But the effect it has on me is I get blotchiness and like a rash all over my chest and arms and other parts to a lesser degree. It's not the end of the planet if that happens, but it becomes very itchy and can drive you almost insane, scratching, and it has a heat to it as well. You don't measure hot, but inside you feel hot and generally not nice. So if you can avoid it, I thought that's a good thing. And this is now an hour from the procedure, and the nurse promptly said, oh, that's a bit unfortunate because that's what you're going to get. And I said, well, there is another kind of high contrast dye that you can use because it's been used on me in the past. Oh, and it's like I said, something revolutionary. Anyway, she went away and came back, seemed like hours later, but I suppose it was only 10 minutes. And she said, oh, we know what you mean. We haven't got any of that. And we don't use that because it costs too much. So, tough shit, basically. Anyway, that's what they're going to do. She says, but we do have an antidote. I thought, right. So, I'd already had a cannula in my arm for future use, so to speak. And she said, we'll squirt some of this in, and you'll also take a tablet as well. And that will largely alleviate the allergy. And we'll also give you a tablet to take afterwards, which I believe is an antihistamine, but I stand to be corrected on that, which will get rid of the effect of the antidote. You couldn't make this stuff up, could you? So that's what happened, and that's what they did. I went into the operating theatre, and they don't actually, in this country, give you a general anaesthetic. They give you, it's not a local either, it's just, I don't know what they call it, but it's, most people, it knocks them out and you don't know what's going on because the procedure isn't painful apparently, and you can talk to them throughout the operation, although I have zero recollection of anything happening during the operation. I come to in the recovery room, and because it's quite funny to me anyway, because they don't ask you to count down because it's not a general. But I can remember saying, I don't think this, because they connect you up to your cannula and squirt the old juice in. And I can remember saying after a short period, I don't think this is working. And they said, well, we've done it. So you just gone like that. And some people say that they're aware of what's going on. I just hope I didn't say anything bad or rude. But I suppose if you're unconscious, even though you're not, if that makes sense, you can't really be held responsible. And so I don't know whether I said anything horrible or tried to chat up one of the nurses. Anyway, so we're back in the recovery room.